We've got Dean in North Carolina.
Hi, Dean. Are you the Dean that I know? Dean?
Did I hit the wrong button?
No.
Dean,
Yes,
hello.
I'm here.
Okay.
Hey.
I'm here. Hello.
Are you the Dean?
I'm the one that
Okay.
I'm the one that visited. Yeah.
Cool. Hi.
Hey.
What you got for us?
Question I have is, one of the things that I often hear, even whether it's from Atheist Experience talkies that are just talking with my atheist friends, is the statement that you can't use the Bible to prove the Bible.
Right.
And one of the questions that I have is, if I look at, let's say the New Testament, and I don't look at it from a position of it's inerrant or it's inspired, what's wrong with saying, all right, these are ancient documents?
Ancient documents written by people, anonymous people,
Well,
right?
let me finish first, Don.
Okay.
These are just ancient documents, and in the same way that a historian would mine Roman documents about Roman history, why couldn't I mine those in the same manner to see if what's talked about is historical or not?
Can I go?
What's wrong with that?
Sure. Go ahead.
Because the fact that they're ancient doesn't make them true. But also, when we go that far back, I'm thinking Caesar and all that, even if you could prove that everything that he said was true, well, I don't think you could prove, because you don't have enough evidence other than this old document.
Yeah.
So let's divide the discussion in half. Let's separate two issues. One is, are the claims miraculous or not? So if the claims are not miraculous, like the town of Bethlehem existed,
Right.
there's not a miraculous claim. Jesus was an itinerant preacher,
Right.
not a miraculous claim, right? Let's put all those aside, and let's talk about the ones that are miraculous, because those are the ones that are of interest. Those are the ones that the Christians base their faith on, right? And those are the ones that we need more evidence for than just as an old story.
Well, no, I would agree that you can't. I would agree that you need more than just it's an old story. My central question is more along the lines of approaching those texts as a historian would approach, say, something like, not that we have the same amount of evidence, I'm not making that equation, but if I had documents that talked about Caesar crossing the Rubicon, and I had documents that talked about Jesus traveling to Galilee, or that Jesus traveled to Jerusalem.
So
or
there's things like whether the claims are miraculous. There's issues of whether or not there's corroborating evidence in other documents. There's the question of, does the author have an obvious agenda? The early Catholic Church is well known to have fabricated things and augmented things to make their story better. And when you start peeling away at that, there's not much left at the end of the day.
No, I would say that anybody that writes history to a certain degree has an agenda, right? Like Ronald Reagan,
yes, and that's why you want to have multiple sources that say the same thing, because presumably, if they're agreeing, they're not in cahoots with each other, right? But the Bible ends up being a kind of coherent collection, or a group of things that were assembled, and so it ends up being sort of one source.
Yeah.
Even though there may be many voices in there.
Well, do you think that? Do you hold to the synoptic Gospels, like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all share either each other's work or source material?
Yeah, there seems to be pretty strong evidence that they have a common source.
Okay, so that would be one source, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You would say that that's one source.
Well, yeah, and
or Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Sorry, Matthew, Mark, and Luke.
But the
the
problem is that those Gospels don't agree, right? So they're already going diverging. It's like the memes are diverging. There's different variations of these stories. Dan Barker has a famous Easter challenge of trying to put all of the events of the Easter into a single unified, coherent narrative that fits all the Gospels, and you can't do it. And so we got two problems. We've got derivative works that disagree, and so we can't really trust any of them, right?
Well, I would say from the standpoint of just looking at it as history, you could have, from a historical standpoint, I think you could have different accounts that talk about different things, but still find a core historical bedrock. And I think even with like Nero's burning of Rome, you have three different authors that say that Nero is in three different places, but they all attest to the fact that Nero was responsible for the burning of Rome. Like one says he was out of town, one says that he was in Rome, the other one says that he was, playing a flute in the palace. But we wouldn't say that because those three disagree, they all agree that Nero was responsible for the burning of Rome. Now, the question of where was Nero during the time of the burning of Rome, that might be a different thing. But we can still get to that core historical bedrock for the case that Nero was.
So you've got the Q source, and you're going to try to find a core historical bedrock out of it, is what you're telling me.
No, I'm simply saying, like Matthew, Mark, and Luke, if we take the approach that they share information.
They share information about what the Q source said, but we don't know much about that Q source, right? Because we don't even have an original of it.
But there are also
so it could just be a story.
Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But there are also things in Matthew, Mark, and Luke that are different, that don't rely on the Q source.
Can I ask you a question?
What I'm saying, yeah, go ahead.
Are you saying that the Bible is basically like a history book in the sense that it has multiple sources and that it's like a textbook kind of thing?
I don't necessarily know that the entire Bible is a history book. There's certainly areas where it's poetic, there's apocalyptic literature. So I wouldn't say that the entire Bible is a history book. I'm simply saying when you look at the Gospels, what you could do, and what I'm trying to see to the atheist is that, hey, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, let's just say that that's one source. Well, you still have John over here that's radically different in the way that it's constructed to Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but still affirms things found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And I'm just asking.
So the author,
looking at it as I'm just asking.
Were the authors aware of these other documents?
I don't know.
So they're not. Yeah, they're quite a bit later. So it's.
Do what?
All of these documents were written after Jesus supposedly died, and none of them are firsthand accounts.
There are multiple documents in history that are written after the person died.
Right. And
so don't you think that the more you modify it, the farther away from truth you get?
Do what?
Do you think that the more that you modify it, the further away from truth that you get? Because as time goes on, it's like the telephone game, let's tweak this, let's tweak that. Eventually you get really far from the truth, but it took very tiny baby steps getting there. So when I'm thinking about, like, when you say it's like a textbook in the sense that it has some historical information, but it also has kind of poems and, different kinds of things, how do you tell the difference between what's actually history and what's not?
No, gotcha. So a couple of things there. When it comes to the telephone game, I don't know if that's a good analogy, because the telephone game, like, one person sends the message and nobody else is allowed to investigate what the other person said.
Oh, okay.
I don't necessarily know if you would have that with the scribes, but I see what you're saying. I get the core of what you're saying. Now, the second piece was, does it get more away from Jesus? I think that's why you have the ability to take the manuscripts that have been written down. Not saying that they are historical because they're transmitted accurately, but the transmission of the text of the manuscripts has been shown to be something like, some scholars say anywhere between 98 and 99.5% accurate with
Interesting.
the pen, misspelling of names,
This is-
things like
Yeah.
that.
This is fascinating
so
stuff.
98% of all statistics are pulled out of
Well, but
somebody's ass.
this is like really cool, really fascinating stuff. But to me, honestly, it just seems like more details of a Star Wars story. You know, like this is all interesting and cool, and yeah, maybe it could fit like this, and maybe it could fit like that. But there's no like, this is how we know.
To me, there's some more interesting points of like there's 3 different patriarchal lineages for Jesus in the Bible, and they can't be reconciled. There's the many promises that Jesus made that said that you could pray and get whatever you wanted from God, and that's clearly not how the universe works. So,
Well, that's the difference between a historical investigation about some core historical facts and hermeneutics and exegesis of the text.
well, he's making a claim that we can test, and the claim is false, and so either he's lying or the Bible's false, right?
Well, you're moving off the topic that I'm trying to address, which is why is it bad or wrong?
Well, I'm telling you why.
Not the same as investigating Roman sources for Roman history.
And I gave you the answer. There's agenda. There's multiple sources.
Everybody has an agenda.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But we have to take that into account for the Bible too.
No, I would
look up
agree.
pious fraud, and you will find that there's tons of stuff in your Bible and in the scriptures that was made up and added later.
Okay.
And that leads me to believe that you can't trust this.
Yeah.
And if that's your strongest evidence for a God, my goodness, that's weak tea.
It was the strongest evidence.
Yeah,
Why don't you use this?
we're always looking for the strongest stuff here.
Well, I'm just asking, why is it okay to do this over here with Roman documents, but not over here with the New Testament documents?
What
it
are
seems
we
like
doing?
what you're saying is.
What are we doing with Roman documents?
What you're saying is, well, it seems like you're saying, okay.
I'm not basing my atheism on Roman documents.
No, that's
just
not my
so you
point.
know.
Hold on, I want to.
That's a red herring. That's not my point. My point is, it seems like you're saying we can't do the same type of investigation with the Roman stuff over here with the New Testament because, one, there's an agenda, and two, because they're miracle claims. It seems like that's what you're saying.
We can't prove that. We can't prove this stuff. I don't.
Miraculous claims need more evidence than just hand waving than a story.
If there was, in these Roman documents, if there was talk about Caesar,
Caesar
blowing
was
up
supposedly
the earth
born
and
under a star,
then rebuilding
and
it,
we don't
or
believe that
something,
either.
Then I would consider that just as fantasy-like.
So it wouldn't matter if they did a historical investigation and they said, all right, based upon the historical investigation that we've done as textual critics, as historians, this is the most probable explanation for why this specific event took place or why these people said that this took place.
But just because we found the most probable doesn't mean that we found the cause.
But that's how you do history, though. You take
so history is rather weak evidence.
But even if you could say that this is possibly what happened in history, possibly is the best that I can get, and I'm not going to base my life on possibly. Right.
Let's if there's a real God, you should be able to test it and come up with something stronger than some history.
Like
some story.
I'm not convinced that there isn't a God. I'm saying that there isn't enough evidence.
Mm-hmm. So I guess my point would be kind of extending the conversation in a different direction, towards something like the resurrection. And you guys have talked to multiple people.
There's been lots of resurrecting gods before. Yeah. So, why is
it's just not
why
possible.
is that interesting? It fits very well in the idea of hey, we're trying to compete with this other god. Let's make our god resurrect.
Cooler. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's add this cool fad.
Cool guy. Yeah.
No, I see that point. I think that the issue there, though, is when you look at those specific resurrection gods, they're either not resurrections or they're tied to the agricultural cycles of the ancient Near East.
And what sort of lack of imagination is it that this all-knowing God chose spring as the time for the resurrection of Jesus, when and using the exact same mechanism as these other gods? Why not do something novel?
You're assuming that Jesus is connected to the cyclical agricultural cycle, and there's
No, I'm not.
no evidence.
No, I'm just saying, if the resurrecting gods gets them in the house and gets money in, why not make your God resurrect?
Well, that's also a red herring and a non sequitur. I don't see how Jesus even compares to something like Mithra, which you mentioned earlier. Mithra doesn't even show up until 150 years after Christianity is already around.
No, that's not true. That's not true.
That is true.
And there are other gods.
Gospels of the Greek.
Okay.
Rama Varnash.
Okay, well,
doesn't show up till 150 AD. Does not prominent again until 360 AD.
I think you're wrong.
Maybe go find some evidence that we can use, that we can say, hey, this is how we know, and then we can talk about that.
So our earliest source is 90 AD, right, for Christianity?
Do what?
Our earliest source, our earliest gospel is 90 AD?
Oh, the earliest gospel, it depends on whether you take the conservative or the liberal dating. The earliest would be on the liberal side of the house. I think it would be Mark at around...
I heard 90.
Well, John's probably around 90 to 100.
Yeah.
But even then, so would you agree that there's a distinct difference about the resurrection that's claimed in the Bible with regards to Jesus and something like Osiris or Tammuz or Mithra?
They're different stories, yeah.
Okay, so it can't just be a flippant, oh, well, there are a bunch of resurrections. If one's tied to the cyclical cycle of agriculture and one's not, that's completely, and one's tied to the saving of sins.
Yeah, it seems like you just want to believe it, and in the face of
nothing to do with just wanting to
other similar claims.
I'm simply saying you can't pass around the meme of they're all the same, and when they're really not.
But to us,
but miracle claims are a dime a dozen.
To us, it's just like the Tooth Fairy and Santa and Peter Pan and all that. Like it
all looks the same to us.
It still looks the same, just as unlikely.
Extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence, and you're not presenting that. You're trying very hard to sweet talk this Bible, and I'm not so interested.
I'm not trying to sweet talk anything, Don. I'm simply saying that your assertion that all the resurrections are the same is not the case. There's a distinct difference.
Well, there is
between Osiris.
Yeah, my claim is that resurrections were well known during the time of the Jesus mythology starting.
Okay.
And gosh, isn't it suspect that got included in this story when all the cool kids had it.
So you're suggesting what then?
I think it's more likely that it got adopted in as a let's make this thing better, let's embellish, than it actually happened. I think that we don't need to make any miraculous claims for that. I think that you need
have that it got adopted in.
I'm sorry?
The New Testament writers. What evidence do you have that the New Testament writers copied that in or adopted that?
I have evidence. There's lots of evidence that they embellished, and they intentionally embellished to make their story better.
But I'm saying
it's my understanding that the birth story was added quite a bit later, and that was adding in embellishments that were also in currency. The being born under a star was also a claim to be in that.
What evidence do you have that was adopted in? that the resurrection account was adopted.
Tell you what, I have better evidence than you do because my claim or my suspicion, it involves no miraculous claims. And yours does. So mine is much more likely than yours, right?
You said you had more evidence. You said you had more evidence, better evidence, that the New Testament authors adopted this resurrecting narrative into the story about Jesus.
I think it's more likely than the miracle claim that Jesus resurrected.
Done. Regardless of the miracle claim, you said that the
I take it back then. If I said that, I was wrong. I think it's more likely that that the story that I'm weaving here doesn't require any miraculous claims and would explain the evidence that you have in front of you.
Okay. So the crux of the issue then is the miraculous claims that are mentioned in the Bible. That's the big difference from your perspective between what we see in something like the Gallic Wars and something like we see in the New Testament. Is we can accept one over here because the Gallic Wars don't make any miracle claims. We reject what's over here in the New Testament because there are miracle claims.
There can still be falsehoods. There can still be falsehoods. There can be misreporting. There can be alteration after the fact, like the virgin birth of, Mary. The virgin birth of Jesus was altered after the fact. All these things. There can be many reasons why the story isn't true. And the miracle thing is certainly one of them, a big one. What we're really wanting is something really substantial to prove God or Jesus or any of these, claims that these theists are coming up with. And, I'm not terribly interested in the Bible. I don't think it proves very much for us. And there's a lot of crap in the Bible, especially if you bring in the Old Testament. And I just don't see it being inspired or interesting or factual or novel or any pretense of being reliable.
Okay. That's essentially my question as far as the difference between secular documents in the New Testament. I'm sure I would love to either come to Austin and visit again and have a conversation.
Please do.
Or call back at some other time.
Yeah.
I've eaten up a lot of time, and I don't want to do that. But I think that your point, Don, I don't want to, I'll cede, well, not cede, but I'll say that I think that there is that compelling evidence. And the next time I call back, I'd like to talk to you when you're on the show.
Okay.
About some of those things that we see in the New Testament that we can build a case for the resurrection. And if you're willing to listen,
right.
Which obviously you are, right. I'm willing to.
Well, you're welcome to call back. Well, thank you for your call, Dean. We appreciate you calling.
Thank you guys.
Thanks for calling, Dean.
Take care. Bye.
All right.
All right.